Okay, so at this point, you guys will have done a couple of readings where I'm going to have you look at the 50s and the paranoia that was caused by the Cold War. We had the Red Scare, where people like Senator Joseph McCarthy was blacklisting people who were thought to be communists in this country, and a lot of that came. Think of the paranoia we're experiencing right now with Corona and everything like that. You don't know who's sick and who's not sick, who's carrying it, who's not. That's how people felt about communists during the 50s. They didn't know who was a communist. Communists could look like anything. Communists, could be. They didn't just strictly come from the Soviet Union. And so on the second slide of this PowerPoint, we know that by 1960, Americans are very anxious. They've been dealing with the Cold War for over 15 years now. There was an economic boom of the 50s, which we're going to talk about in another unit, where this is when all the baby boomers were born, and just times were really good. Remember, America, directly after we get out of wars, we typically experience very good times because we've become rich off of war. We know that once we got out of World War One, we went to the roaring 20s. Well, the same thing happened after World War Two. We went into the booming 50s. And there's going to be a slight recession in the 60s. Rock and roll music is out. And again, we're going to talk about this in another unit. And it's terrifying parents. Like, you've got Elvis up there shaking his hips, and, you've got the Beatles and all those bands, and parents were like, this is the devil's music, this is horrible. And oh my gosh, could you imagine what they would think about y'all's garbage rappers today if they could fast forward and see NBA Youngboy and Young Thug and all these people? Yikes. We are going to talk about the civil rights. That's a whole other unit as well, but that's going on during this time too. We've got African Americans in this country that are just furious at the way they've been treating. You had a situation where an African American vet that fought in World War II, he was on a bus and he was wearing his World War II uniform, and he refused to, I believe, move seats or something of that nature. And at the next bus stop, he got off, and there was a group of white men waiting for him, and they blinded him. They took out his eyes. So you can see there's a lot of anger in the African American community, and rightly so. There's communism in Vietnam. There's an issue in Cuba, which we'll talk about later. And we're just on the brink. Instead of going from, we had containment, and we were like, we're not going to go directly to war with the Soviet Union. We're just going to contain communism. Well, we know that didn't work because North Korea stayed communist and all of Vietnam fell to communism. And so now we go from containment to brinkmanship. And we'll talk about that as this section goes on. So we're in 1960. We have an election coming up. And it's going to be Republican Richard Nixon. He served 8 years as vice president. And basically what he's promising the people is he's going to keep government spending and taxes low. People are afraid that with the recession coming, they're going to raise taxes to try to compensate for that. But he promises as president that he's going to keep taxes low. And then running against him is this Democrat, John F. Kennedy. And he only served in Senate for 2 terms. He has no foreign policy experience. He's very young. He's seen as just kind of like an upstart. He's Catholic, which is, remember, in America, we're Protestants. Catholicism is not really our thing. But what he offers is that thing that Obama offered us. It's this youthful hope, like there can be change. I can bring change. I'm young enough and open-minded enough to bring that sort of thing to America. And so the crazy thing about the 1960 election is, remember, TVs are in every household by this point. And for the first time in American history, a presidential debate is not heard on the radio. It's also seen on TV. So you can see pictures over here on the PowerPoint if you're going through. The TV debates really helped John F. K win this election because the man is good looking. And he dresses in these great suits. He's from a very wealthy family in the northeast part of this country. And he's just well-spoken, composed, and the ladies love him. And I gotta say, even the guys want to be him. The ladies love him. And so this marks the beginning also of TV dominance, where we are now a country that gathers around the TV. And it hasn't changed now. Y'all gather around your phones, but we're now a TV type of nation. Now, President Kennedy, I'm on slide 6. Oh, I'm sorry. So let me go back because I forget some of you guys are handwriting notes. So on slide 3, where it talks about Richard Nixon, I need you guys to write what he promised, which was to keep government spending and taxes low. So you need to write that last bullet point. And then on slide 4, the Kennedy slide, you guys need to write that he offered active leadership to address America's problems. So you need to know what each president was offering during this election. Now, President Kennedy represented youth, charisma, hope, and just a new approach to the government. And that's what people were looking for. We were looking for a new sort of path to go down. And JFK's family, again, this is like the Kardashians of their time. He married a beautiful woman, and they have these gorgeous children, and people are just captivated by their family. The First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, created a new standard. Again, if you go to the next slide, you'll see like she's got the pearls, the gloves. She's just the essence of everything an American woman should be. She's well-dressed. She's well-spoken. She's always by her husband's side. She's always with her kids. She had the scarves over her head. And so she just creates this new standard of beauty and fashion in the American to the American public. They had 2 kids. If you go to the next slide, you'll see right there, you've got his son playing under his desk, and you've got his daughter giving him a little kiss. And again, the nation adored the Kennedys. They are very, very beloved by the American public. Now, President Kennedy's vision for America, I'm on slide 9, is called A New Frontier. And you need to write that down, as well as the text actually, you need to write this whole slide down, sorry. So this is slide 9. And his new frontier, basically, he knows he's young and inexperienced. He knows he doesn't know everything. And so to compensate for that, he fills his cabinet with the best and brightest political minds in America. So if you look in that picture, you can see him surrounded by older gentlemen. His brother is also right by him as well, Robert Kennedy, who we're going to talk about. He's a very important becomes very important in the future of things. He wants to improve the lives of all Americans. And the civil rights is going on at the same time as the Cold War. And again, we'll talk about that in a different unit. But there's an extreme amount of violence happening in the South. And in Birmingham in 1963, after a whole violent issue broke out, JFK committed to create the Civil Rights Act. And he also wants to wage a war on poverty. The inner cities are crumbling. There's been a white flight. And what that means is suburbans have been built up, and a lot of the wealthy people have left the city and moved out into suburbia. And that left a lot of inner cities like, parts of New York, parts of Detroit, parts of Chicago. It just left it in disarray. All this money left and took their taxes with them. And so we have a situation where a lot of Americans are very impoverished, and the gap between the rich and the poor is beginning to very noticeably grow. And he wants to decrease that. He wants better lives for every American. So in the Cold War, JFK takes a really strong stand against the Soviet Union. He believes that the USSR has more ICBMs. This is intercontinental ballistic missiles. Basically, it means that the Soviet Unions could launch a missile from the Soviet Union all the way, and it would reach all the way to American soil. And so he also believes they have better space technology, which he is correct. They, at the moment, do have better space technology. Remember, they're the first people to launch a satellite into space. It was not us. They're also the first person to put a man in space, not us. And so JFK realizes he's got to do something about our position in the Cold War, because from what it looks like to everyone, we're losing. So he develops, I'm on slide 11, and you need to write what's in the yellow box, something called a flexible response. Basically, he wants a bigger military for intimidation purposes, and he wants more ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So if they launch missiles at us, we're going to launch them right back at them, and then we're just going to tear each other up. And this is called mutually assured destruction, which means, look, I know you're strong, but I'm strong too. So if you start something with me, I'm coming right back at you. And basically, we're just going to burn each other's houses down. No one's going to come out of this good. And so he believes by having those capabilities, we'll be able to deter or stop the Soviets from wanting to attack us or trying to attack us. Now, I'm on slide 12. So JFK also is known for creating the Peace Corps in 1961. So it's weird because we've got us building more missiles and becoming more aggressive towards the Soviet Union. But at the same time, he builds the Peace Corps. And this Peace Corps, their job is to send humanitarian aid to countries that need it. Like if there's an earthquake in Haiti, if there's a drought in Africa, we send people to go aid and relieve the situation, bring food, water. You've seen commercials for the Peace Corps before, and it is still around today. It's a fantastic organization. I encourage you to look at it more closely if you have time. But you do need to write that he did create the Peace Corps in 1961. That's on slide 12. All right, so in 1962, JFK is committed to putting a man on the moon. If we can't be the first people in space, if we can't have the first satellite, we can at least be first on the moon. And so he begins to sink money into a program to put us onto the moon. Now, you guys know I love conspiracy theories. And so in 1969, I'm on slide 14, we landed on the moon. And we are the first people on there. And of course, you've got that, this is one small step for man, one blah, blah, blah for mankind. According to history, okay, we got to the moon first. And it was real. And Neil Armstrong was the guy. And boom. I don't know if we actually... I just am one of those people that I just don't know if we got there in 1969. Okay, I'm not going to get into it. If we were in class, this is one of those times where I totally deviate and we'd probably have like a 10-minute discussion about why I don't think the moon landing's real. You can find these conspiracies on YouTube, by the way. I'm not the only person that thinks this. Probably the worst history teacher ever. All right, so in JFK's first year in office, Soviet leader Khrushchev threatened to cut off access to West Berlin. So here we go with the West-East Berlin situation again. He threatens to cut off access to West Berlin. And JFK was like, no, we will never give you access to our half of Berlin, of that capital city in Germany. You stay over there and we'll stay over here. But if you come over here, we will fight you for this. And so rather than blockade the city, the communists just built a wall. And so this is when the Berlin Wall goes up, and it was up until 1989. That is a really, really long time. And it separated. So the sucky thing is, if you were in East Berlin, you were on the communist side, they built this wall, and you had family on the west side, you didn't see those people. Like you may die never seeing that family again. I mean, that would be like splitting Kansas City. Okay, here's the Kansas side, here's the Missouri side. And you can't go past that wall. It's like, I have friends, family, relatives that live on the other side. That's exactly what happened in Berlin, and it's really sad. You can look and see in the pictures right here, the wall, it was 110 miles long. If you got caught trying to sneak over it, they would shoot you, no questions asked. It was very, they had electric fences, there was traps and things of that nature, so you were not getting over to the other side. So in 1959, Fidel Castro, kind of backtracking a little bit, this is right before JFK becomes president, Fidel Castro gains control of Cuba, and when he is gaining control of Cuba, he is aided by Khrushchev in the Soviet Union. Fidel Castro is a communist, and so he gains control of Cuba, and that means Cuba is now communist. Now, what do we care about a little island? Well, we don't. Well, here's a problem. It's right off the coast of Florida. It's really close to the United States. So the fact that we have a communist literally at our doorstep, aided by our arch enemies, the Soviet Union, causes us to panic. So under Eisenhower, that was the president right before JFK, he's going to have the CIA training to overthrow Castro. So he's training them day and night, day and night. Well, he's not president anymore. JFK is. So in 1961, JFK, learning that the CIA has been training for this for a couple of years, authorizes the plan. It's called the Bay of Pigs invasion. And the Bay of Pigs, if you look on the map, is just what they called the, just that little inlet where the water goes into Cuba. And it is a disaster. The CIA get there. Fidel was just prepared, and it did not work. We did not overthrow Castro. It was embarrassing for everyone involved, the CIA, the U.S. government, JFK. But JFK did something really brave. He went on TV and he took full response. He said, everything that happened is my fault. I shouldn't have sent those men. They were not ready to go. I should not have. It was bad timing. And the only person you can blame is me. And that's really admirable, because when was the last time you heard our current president say that anything was his fault? Go ahead, I'll wait. No, I didn't. That's what I thought. Okay. So, that wasn't a good look for us. Trying to overthrow this guy and invade this island, and it was a disaster. So after the failure at the Bay of Pigs, Khrushchev promised Cuba, if they give you any more trouble, we will come defend you. We will send ships, aid. We will come to your side of the world, America, and we will defend this little island, so leave them alone. Well, can we really leave them alone? No, come on now, that's so stupid. So we're still spying on Cuba. It's 1962. I'm on slide 22. And our spies reveal that they are building a nuclear missile camp there. And what that means is we believe that the Soviets are going to move nuclear missiles literally into our back door. They could hit any target they want from Cuba with a nuclear missile. We cannot let that happen at all. So the JFK our government told the Soviets, we would not allow any nuclear missiles into Cuba. If you try to bring some, it will be a fight. And we will go from a Cold War to a hot one real quick. So if you were JFK, he gets his team around him, and they offer him several options. So I'm on slide 24, and you need to write down all the options that are presented on slide 24. And one of them was like, look, let's do an immediate airstrike. Let's just send airplanes and bomb that base they're building, and that's the end of that story. Like, they can't launch a nuclear missile if they don't have a nuclear missile launch pad. Another guy's like, just a full military invasion. Let's send all the guys we can into that island, and let's try to see them take it from there. One person's like, look, we got to do diplomacy. Why don't we trade? We had missiles in the Middle East aimed at the Soviets. And so we were like, let's take some of those missiles out of the Middle East. And in exchange, they'll take some of those missiles out of Cuba. And then the last option is going to be a naval blockade. Cuba's an island. Let's just surround it with ships. And that way nothing can get in and nothing can get out. That way they can't drop off missiles. Okay. I guess take a second to think about what you would choose of those four options. To me, the last two are the best. You either go diplomatic, look, I'll remove missiles if you do, or you go a blockade, because a full war with these people, again, is going to not just destroy us, but it's going to destroy the world. We've seen what 2 atomic bombs do, and now we've got even stronger atomic bombs than the one we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we went with the blockade. And we blockaded the island, and the Soviets still came with their ships and their submarines. And it's literally the tensest moment in probably modern history, because the whole world is waiting for one. It's going to take one ship to fire, and it is World War III. And no one would be surprised if that happened, the way things have been escalating lately. And so this is very tense at the last minute, because it was really down to the, look, we're going to fire on you if you don't move your ships, United States. And we're like, we're going to fire right back at you, and we're going to sink your stuff, and we're going to go to war. The standoff ended when a deal was reached, and the Soviet ships turned around, and Khrushchev removed the missiles from Cuba. So this is slide 26. You need to write down what happened in this standoff. This is the conclusion, was that he removed the missiles from Cuba, he turned his ships around, and he did not put nuclear weapons into Cuba. At the same time, we removed those intercontinental ballistic missiles from Turkey. So that was the agreement. So what actually, the last two options happened. There was a blockade, and at the same time, there was a removal of missiles. the crisis ended as a victory for JFK. Like, he came out looking just glorious. Like, he saved the world from a World War III. He was strong, he was forceful, but he wasn't aggressive. You know, some men, like, you can tell they're looking for a fight. They're doing everything they can to provoke the other person. And some men are just trying their best to maintain composure and be like, look, bro, back down, back down. You don't want this smoke. You don't want this smoke. That's who JFK was. He is not trying to provoke a fight because he knows how devastating it's going to be for the entire world. But he stood strong at the same time, because you can't let these people take advantage of you, or they're going to keep taking advantage of you. And so we came extremely close to a nuclear war, but thank God it was avoided. So, unfortunately, in his first term, I'm on slide 28, JFK was assassinated in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. Lee Harvey Oswald took the blame. That's who they accused of shooting, a lone shooter, basically. This is another conspiracy theory of mine. Go to slide 29. Okay, so the chronology of events. This is how it went. Lee Harvey Oswald. Okay, so JFK is shot in the head. Right. His wife is next to him. They're in this convertible. They're at downtown Dallas. They're waving. There's a parade, and all of a sudden you hear 2 shots ring out. And one of them catches him in the head, and he collapses in his wife's lap. You can go online. If we were together, we would actually stop right here, and we'd watch the video of his assassinations on video. And you should do that. Get on YouTube and look it up. And he collapses in his wife's lap. He actually doesn't die right then and there, which is crazy. He dies in the hospital after that. So when after they find the Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested, VP Lyndon Johnson is sworn in on Air Force One when the president's declared dead. And who swears him in, so who holds the Bible, is JFK's wife. And she still has the blood of her husband on her when she's swearing in Lyndon B. Johnson as our new president. And after 2 days later, before Oswald can be put on trial and any questions can be asked, he's killed by Jack Ruby, this other gunman. Shoots him, kills him, point blank range. So now we can't even ask Lee Harvey Oswald, like, what his intentions were, who he was working with this. After a 10-month investigation, the Warren report stated that Oswald was a lone gunman. And that he was a vet, and he was angry, and he shot and killed our president. I wish we were in class together, because I don't think that's what happened. But you can see all these conspiracy theories again online. I don't think that's what happened. Look, I put a conspiracy theory. Look at slide 30. I'm just like, you can get online and look. There's tons of them. I think that's what happened. All right. Let's see, how much does this float into? Okay, so JFK's assassination had important consequences in America. I'm on slide 32. You need to write the last box, that yellow one. So the martyrdom, or the assassination of JFK, put pressure on Congress because they were hesitant. Again, this is the civil rights era stuff, so I'm just going to briefly go over it because we're going to go over it way more in depth when we talk about the civil rights era. They were forced to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because they felt obligated, like, okay, JFK was working really hard to get this passed. Let's pass it for this guy, our dead president. Lyndon B. Johnson, who's from Texas, we already talked about him a little bit. He's going to continue the war on poverty, and he's going to come up with something, and this is what I want you to write. It's called the Great Society. And it's this idea that we can get civil rights done and get everyone medical help, and the environment needs work. We're starting to pollute the heck out of our air, and we know that. And we need more social programs. The welfare isn't cutting it. There are still millions of Americans not just in cities, but in the countryside that are impoverished and don't have what they need. And this is supposed to be the greatest country in the world, but millions of people don't have the bare necessities to survive. And so his great society, he has really good intentions with this, and we're going to talk about this more. Some of it is going to work. Unfortunately, because he only serves one full term as president, it's not as effective as he had dreamed it would be, this great society. So Lyndon B. Johnson in 1963 became president because JFK was shot. He runs again for president in 1964 and smashes his opponent, as you can see, which was Barry Goldwater, who was like all about using nuclear weapons and being very aggressive towards the Soviet Union. And people were like, we don't want that, bud. Did you know you're not paying attention? No one wants to go to war. We don't want to be in Vietnam right now, and look where we are. So that's why Barry Goldwater just wasn't happening. And LBJ's Great Society was basically like FDR's New Deal programs, but on a bigger scale. He's going to improve those New Deal programs so they're further reaching to Americans. All right, so I'm on slide 34. 60s is a very tumultuous time, and we're going to get into that again because of the civil rights. And this is if you're looking at the picture right there, this is the picture on my door in my classroom. This is from the 1968 Olympics, and they've got their fists in the air. That's Black Power. And so, again, we'll talk about that later. Now, I just want to go on slide 35, and you need to write down all of slide 35. Robert Kennedy, who is JF Kennedy's brother, very handsome, just like he is, as you can see right there, is going to take up what his brother was doing and enter politics more heavily. He was in his brother's cabinet, and he worked for his brother, and he was always involved in politics, but now he's taking it to the next level, just like his brothers, and he's going to run for president in 1968. He's assassinated. It's wild, 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 wild. And unfortunately, when he gets killed, the Democratic Party can't find someone to nominate. Not a good enough candidate anyway that everyone would get behind. And so kind of by default, Richard Nixon took advantage of the divided Democratic Party and wins the 1968 election. And you should also know at some point Nixon gets impeached. So again, we'll talk about that more as we get down the line because we're pushing really close to the 70s and I don't want to get there just yet. You already know this because I've already gone over the Vietnam War with you. But by 1965, Americans were directly sent into Vietnam to fight and keep it from being communist. It was a disaster. There were student and activist protests across the country because no one wanted to be in this war. No one wanted us in Vietnam. And we know the draft was very unfair. These anti-war protests and then the Kent State Massacre are what convinced LBJ not to even bother to run again. And so that is it. I think for the most part, that's it. Again, there's going to be some readings you're going to do before this lecture to give you more background information because I do feel like I skipped the 50s and I do go back and talk about the 50s. This was like an activity we were going to do. We're going to have trading cards and you're going to see how like this is when girls were wearing the poodle skirts and you know, rock and roll and all that stuff. So I'm bummed I can't do it with you. There will be some readings. They're just not as fun as like us hanging out and getting to do those. Stay safe. I miss you guys and just hang in there.